Well, hey, everybody, welcome to Seeing Ability, where we're having a conversation about the world of people with disabilities. And that means we're going to be talking to folks who grew up with a disability, to the parents who raised them, and to a lot of different people that support this community, whether it's educators, whether it's folks in healthcare, or folks in nonprofits. And I'm super excited today because this is one of our nonprofit spotlight episodes. You're going to hear what brings my guests today together a little bit later and about the organization they're a part of. But that's the focus of today's episode. And I think you're going to enjoy it because we've got the executive director of the organization and a couple of parents who both have kids that are clients of this organization at different ends of the spectrum in terms of their ages. So first of all, I want to thank you for tuning in. I know you've got a lot of choices when it comes to podcasts. So I really appreciate you tuning in to Seeing Ability. Hopefully you'll enjoy what you saw today or heard today, and you'll share it with other people. Now, if you're a listener, you know we like to start off, even though we're connected by this journey, we're all just people. So I like to start off with the Fast Four. And our Fast Four is brought to us by the folks at Reliable Tech Help. So remember, for all your tech needs, call Reliable Tech Help. They're at 502-797-7399. That's tech with a K, not a CH. Okay, here's the rapid fire. It's kind of like the lightning round of the Fast Four. The first question is, what is a good book you've been reading? First of all, Nancy, welcome to the program. Let's start with you.
A Man of Good Zeal about Francis de Sales, late 1500s, early 1600s.
I love it. Okay, Adam, welcome. How about you?
Hey, great. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Right now, the best book that I'm reading is Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer.
I've read that.
That's a classic. Okay, and Nina, welcome. Welcome. What about you?
Well, believe it or not, I'm actually reading a history book. It's called The Light and the Glory by Peter Marshall, and it's taking a look at early America.
All right, Nina, I'll stay with you. We're wrapping up summer. What was your favorite memory from this summer?
Oh, just being in the pool with my kids and grandkids, mostly my grandkids because I had them while their parents were working, but it's been a wonderful summer that way.
Nancy, how about you?
I was able to reconnect with my family. I'm one of 8. We celebrated my mom's passing. She lived for 92 years. And so it was just a wonderful time together.
Wow, what a great reason to come together to bring that group back. That's really neat. Adam,
they're all out
you?
of town too. So, or I should say, I'm out of town from them mostly.
Yeah, it's bittersweet how those events in life do they're sad and emotional, but they have benefits to bring us together.
Yes.
Adam, how about you?
The best part of the summer had to be the beach. The whole family going to the beach is always a good time.
I've never heard people have too bad of a time at the beach, so that's pretty universal. Okay, Adam, we'll stick with you. What is your favorite sweet treat? What's your guilty pleasure?
Oh, it's dangerous. The Blizzard from Dairy Queen. Got to have the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup.
The Blizzard from Dairy Queen. If you're listening out there, Dairy Queen, we always need sponsors of the podcast. Nancy, how about you? What's your favorite treat?
I love a good cake.
Good cake. Okay. That's you're kind of in the same genre. And Nina, how about you?
Oh, hands down, ice cream, just about any flavor.
Okay.
I save my sugar for ice cream.
Ice cream and cake. You guys are all of the same mind. I'm not surprised. Last but not least, if we could bring back someone from the past that you could meet and maybe have dinner with them, who would it be? We'll start with Adam.
I'm a big baseball guy, so I'd have to say Babe Ruth. Got a lot of questions for him.
Okay, Babe Ruth. Nancy?
I have a panel. I'd like to talk to Mary, the Mother of God, to Francis de Sales, and to Mother Teresa.
Whoa,
a lot of
there you go.
perseverance and a lot of patience that I think could help me out in my life.
We're having a panel today, so I think that's appropriate. And Nina, what about you?
Well, I'm kind of in line more with Nancy on this one. I would sit down with Jesus over a meal, which would be a communion between the two of us, and have a lot of questions for him too. So I'm in line with Adam on that one, asking questions, answers that will eventually come, hopefully, but I don't know.
Well, thank you guys for sharing. Like I said, it's always good to know a little bit about you. Now, the thing that bonds you together is the work you do around the organization SMILE and Down syndrome that we're going to learn about later in the episode. But you also are bound together because you're all parents, having a child with special needs yourself. So when you think back about the journey, and some of you are earlier into it, Adam with, I think, a 2-year-old, and Nina and Nancy with 28 and 30-year-olds, if you think back, what has this journey taught you about yourself? And I guess I'll start with the rookie of the bunch, Adam.
Yeah, definitely the rookie of the bunch. I would say that it has definitely taught me perspective. I feel like everything for me and my family, it feels like we're always in the fast lane. And so definitely taught me a lot about perspective and the things that are most important to us and to our family and our friends. And this beautiful little blessing, this our 2-year-old Shay, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Nancy, how about you?
I agree with Adam. I thought about that in the younger years, and now I realize that I actually know more than I thought I did, which makes things not so scary. So as I get into things, I actually knew more than I gave myself credit for, and it makes it a little bit easier.
Okay. And Nina, how about you? What has this taught you about yourself?
Oh, my daughters have taught me so much. But I think the biggest thing is that for the first part of my life, even before my daughter Tess was born, and even after, I'm a perfectionist. I have to admit it. And one of the things that has dynamically changed my life is I realize perfection is not achievable for any of us. And I can learn to relax a little bit, and I can still enjoy life, even though I'm not perfect. And I fall continuously, which then means that I'm not burdened down with lost expectations. I can just relax and be at peace with it is what it is, and we'll just do the best we can.
Yeah. And what's that quote I like that says there is no road to happiness, but happiness is the road? Sometimes when we're striving for perfection, we're so focused on that result that we forget that life is about the journey.
Right.
That's really great. So what about, there's a lot of things when you're kind of throwing the curveball in life, when you find out you're going to have a child with some sort of disability, and there's things you're going to learn the hard way. What did you probably have to figure out that you learned the hard way? We'll start this time with Nancy. There's probably a bunch of them, but pick maybe one or two.
To trust my instincts and to not be afraid to speak up or be intimidated. We get surrounded by a lot of, quote, experts and professionals, and realizing that I know more about my child than any of them do, even at a young age of 1 or 2. I had a physical therapist who was trying to teach my daughter, I guess she was about 3 or 4, to navigate stairs. And you could tell by Bridget's grip and the way she was feeling that it was very hard for her. And the therapist said, "Oh, she's just being stubborn." And I said, "You cannot use that word ever again in response to her, because she will be labeled that way the rest of her life. She is visibly afraid of what she's doing." And so calling these guys on re-looking at what they're doing, just because they've had 30 or 40 years in it, maybe they need to have a fresh perspective. And I've learned to trust my instincts and speak up. Doesn't always happen, and leads to frustrations and both doing it and not doing it. But that's been a big thing for me.
Yeah, that trusting your instincts. I think both of those things, the trusting your instincts, your gut, as a lot of people say, and then the speaking up when you don't see something is right. Did you have, having a child that's a little bit older, 30 now, was that something that came to you pretty naturally in the beginning, or did you have to learn that and then get better at it over time?
I had to get better over time. I think it came to me when it was really important that it would happen, like when she was young. But a lot of times I let things go, and I had to go back and try to figure out how to make them work and how to let people know I didn't like the way they were handling things, or they were leaving out, certain issues with her maybe. And the same physical therapist, Bridget was about 2.5, and she was in a day program, and she had just started walking. So they were wanting to help her. So they got physical therapy, and her goal was to walk down the hall. And they got her this little walker, so she can take a little walker and walk down the hall. And I
Mhm.
went to pick her up, and the physical therapist, and I said, "What's going on?" So she told me, she says, "I can't get her to walk down the hall." And I am here in this early learning center thinking, what is the matter with you guys? And I looked at one of the assistants. I said, "Can you go get me two different color cups and the bears that match them?" And they put the cups at the end of the hall and the bears. I said, "Hey, Bridget, take the purple one and go put it in the purple cup." She just treks on down the hall. And this therapist was like, you know, she had been doing this for so long and not thinking that our kids need incentives like any other. And it doesn't have to be food, it can be fun things. And so, things like that make you speak up and kind of make a joke about it and do it. And then you get in meetings and you're intimidated and you're like, you leave the meeting and go, "I wish I'd said this. I wish I'd brought this up," or, that kind of thing. So it goes back and forth, and it gets easier as they're older, but it gets also different. So then there are times where it's hard to use it, especially when you deal with medical issues and stuff. And we've had quite a few lately. So yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that story, because I think it's one thing to say, listen to your instincts and speak up, but then you giving that example of just the cups and the bears really brings it to life for me. Thank you so much. Now, Adam, you're, like we said, you're right in the midst of that learning curve, but you've probably already had things in these early years that you've had to figure out and learn the hard way. What are some of those?
Yeah, definitely the hardest part for us to this point so far would be the coordination on the medical side with the different doctors that aren't necessarily connected with one another.
Mhm.
So trying to coordinate the different places that we have to go, and going to Indianapolis from here for one appointment and then turn around and go again the following week. So getting the coordination with appointments and the different doctors has been very difficult so far for us. So we're trying to navigate that as best we can so far, but definitely getting better at it as we go.
Okay, let's do some real-time coaching here. We've got Adam, and he's a younger parent coordinating all this. We've got Nina and Nancy, who have been around the block a couple times with kids in their late 20s to 30. What advice would you give, Nina, to Adam, or listeners like him that are like coordinating all this on the medical side? What's some things you've learned that you're working with your clients and advising them?
I think one of the first things, Adam, is asking, and you may already have done this, but asking the medical professionals up in Indianapolis if there is an equivalent professional specialist where you live, which would be Evansville area. So you don't have to make those back and forth trips. We do have some resources in our community now that we didn't have when my girl was little. But there's Deaconess Riley Clinic here. I know that you have to get established up in Indy first with on-site, but then there's also virtual consulting now as well. So those are a couple of ideas, and we can talk about some others maybe at another point. But Nancy has had a lot of experience locally and in other areas too. So Nancy, you want to address what you've done with Bridget lately?
So for what I would recommend is that you find a patient advocate there who can help you coordinate these appointments in the same day or over 2 days, where you spend a night and you're not traveling back and forth. And so you actually have some family time and some downtime. If you can afford to do it, maybe use the Ronald McDonald House. But even if you can get them in one day, yes, it makes a long day. And make sure you either bring somebody else to listen, or you say, "I'd like to record this meeting so that I can go back and listen to it." And even though they're going to give you a summary, they're giving you their summary. And when you always hear things differently. So those are a couple of things I would suggest.
I love it. Real-time coaching. I like it. So Nina, for you, and there's probably a lot, but what are the top of your head, a couple of those lessons learned the hard way?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind is I actually have two daughters with Down syndrome, and one is biological and the other is through adoption. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty confident when I had Tess. She's my fourth child, but then I lost my confidence when I got that prenatal diagnosis. I don't know how to care for a child with global special needs, such as Down syndrome. And then we became confident as the years progressed. And 8 years later, we got a phone call asking us if we would be interested in adopting a baby girl with Down syndrome. And we said, yes, I'm confident. I know how to parent a child with Down syndrome. And so a few weeks later, we became parents again to a second child, a little girl with Down syndrome. How hard could it be? Well, the hardest lesson is that no two people with the same diagnosis can be treated the same, can be nurtured the same. They cannot be taught the same, just like any other children we have in our family. I have 5 children, and 4 of them would be considered firstborns by birth order psychologists. And so no two are alike, and definitely no two people with the same diagnosis can be raised, nurtured, advocated for on the same level. We just have to do it with a lot of compassion, a lot of love, and educating ourselves.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That was a real insight to think that like you thought you had it licked. And there you go, parent. I always say there's nothing more humbling than being a parent in general, even if we're a quote typical child. But then you take this journey, and I guess it reminded you of that, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let me ask a similar but kind of slightly different question. And this goes to like the value of hindsight being 2020. For each of you, what's one thing you wish somebody had told you back in the beginning? It would have made life a lot easier. Maybe we can share it today and it'll help some other people. Let's start with Nancy. How about you? What's the one thing you wish they had said?
I wish they had told me just to love her as a baby. Just take her and have her as a baby. She was my first and my only, by God's design. And I was one of 8, and I did babysitting, but I was so focused on this diagnosis of something I hadn't been aware of, or I guess I was aware of it, but hadn't had any experience with it.
Sure.
That I didn't just necessarily love her as a baby. And that, just remember that she's a person, and she has these issues, but she's also a person, and she's
Right.
funny, and she's a handful, and from little to big, and just like anyone. And she's probably more typical than what you would think. She just needs some extra things to help prop her up and help her get through and stuff. So I wish that had come out earlier.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. So Nina, how about you?
Well, Nancy, the thing that someone said to me that meant the most to me when I first had my daughter, I'm going to switch from what I wish I had been told to that very same thing that you wished you had been told is exactly what was told to me. We were in the hospital for 6 weeks, and prior to her delivery, I was in the hospital almost a week. And there was a young lady in the hospital cafeteria who happened to have Down syndrome. I didn't really want to talk to her. I was afraid I would break down and cry and just boohoo, and she wouldn't know what to do with me. And her name is Beth. Well, Beth's mom, Nancy, her name was Nancy. And this is 28 years ago, and there are some things in my memory that are just seared in there. So Nancy, the nurse, and her daughter Beth were there every day. And after my daughter was born, and it was a traumatic delivery, it was a life and death situation, and we were about to go home. And I got a knock on my door, and Nancy stuck her head in, and she says, she didn't ask if it was a good time or not, because she
never
knew better.
Is.
Right?
It's never a good time.
She just said, "Hi, Nina, I'm Nancy, and I'm Beth's mom." And I said, "Oh, hi." And she said, "I just want to tell you this. Love your baby, because she is your baby. It doesn't matter right now that she has Down syndrome or is 10 weeks premature. It doesn't matter that she has 2 heart defects. Just love her like you've loved your other children." And that was the best advice I've ever been given. It's exactly what I planned to do, of course, but I also included some fear and trepidation with parenting this new little life that I had no idea what to expect. With Down syndrome, it's a syndrome. And so I don't recommend the book that was recommended to me. This is what I wish they hadn't said or hadn't done. And that is a specific book all about Down syndrome. And it included 80 different health issues, everything from cross-eyed to heart defects, all of the possibilities. And I looked at my husband and I said, even if this baby inside of me is born and she has 50% of those issues, she's going to be sickly her whole life. And so I don't recommend that book. And I'm not going to say what it is now because some parents may have liked it. But Adam, we didn't give you that book. There's no way. But we have some other resources that are of encouragement. And the stark reality is we really don't know what issues each of our babies is going to have. And so we'll deal with them as it comes along, but there are a few that are specific to Down syndrome in at least 50%. And so we discuss that as we need to.
Yeah, I love the juxtaposition of what Nancy wished somebody had just straight out told her you were blessed to have received as a gift.
Yes.
Pretty awesome having you both here. And so, Adam, what about you? What do you wish somebody had told you back in the day, a couple of years ago?
It seems so long ago now. When we first were given the diagnosis, the wheels immediately start spinning. How's this going to change for us? What's her life going to look like? What are the medical hardships that she may encounter? And, we immediately start, talking with Nina and getting all these different resources and information and processing things. And I think the big thing for us was we just needed to be told to slow down, take a deep breath, and realize this is God's plan. He would not have given us this child if he didn't think we could handle it. So take a deep breath, relax. Again, just like they said, love your child and take each day for what it is, and everything else will be fine.
Yeah, such good advice. And you think of the journey of a parent raising a quote typical child, that path is not set in stone, right? The projection of that, but most of us don't worry looking at our 3-month-old what it's going to be like when they're 12 for a quote typical child. But when you have a child with a disability, you're worried about 10 and 12 and 20 and 25, and you just sort of go down that rabbit hole. So the idea of like being where you are and realizing that have a good today that'll lead to a better tomorrow, that whole presence. Yeah, that's a really good advice. Thank you, Adam. So let me ask you this, probably more for Nancy and Nina. A lot of times in my conversations on the podcast, and it naturally starts with folks like Adam who have very young kids, and you're kind of thinking of the beginning where you sort of have the journey of acceptance of like, wow, we're going to have a not typically abled kid, and we're going to have to these medical journeys and stuff. And it's the younger kids, birth to 6. But what about listeners who have a kid, maybe someone with Down syndrome that's more of a teenager, or say 10 to 18, and maybe what advice would both of you, Nancy and Nina especially, give to those parents out there who have that kid, even regardless of the diagnosis, about kids in that kind of that age range? Let's start with you, Nina.
Parenting is going to be difficult with any teenager. Let's just be honest. And it's because they're asserting some independence. It's the terrible twos all over again, because they want some independence. They still love us. We do believe that. We keep telling ourselves that, and we confess that. Yes, they do love us. And it's not a whole lot different raising a teenager with an intellectual disability. They want their independence. So we have to learn to parent a little differently at every phase of our child's life. Tess is now 28, and she doesn't want to be parented like she's 12. Hope is 20 and she doesn't want to be parented like she's still a little kid. And so Andy and I, my husband and I, have had to learn to acquiesce a little bit. We have to say, well, instead of saying, no, that's wrong, we have to say, oh, well, I can see your point of view, but still, you can't be out on your own yet and have a car. And yeah, so we have to step around that sometimes. And it becomes difficult on our part because we have dedicated these couple of decades of our lives to protecting this child and not wanting anybody to harm them in any way, whether it's emotional, physical, other, sexual abuse. Those are all areas that we are concerned about as parents for our child, but we don't express them for the most part. So how do we let go of an adult child with special needs? Jim, that's a question for you to answer because you have let go. If I understand right, your daughter doesn't live at home.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that whole issue is probably a whole nother topic for another day. I think it might, when I'm talking to folks lately, it might be the subject of a second book that I'm working on. Nancy, how about you with lessons learned in the teenage years?
Well, I learned that she's more typical than she is special needs. And I just have to package what I tell her differently. And puberty comes on target and is not delayed like everything else is. So how do you parent a child in puberty who's really on a kindergarten level of understanding? So it can be quite different. And it's not to scare you, Adam. Please don't be afraid of this because it flows. I mean, you go through preschool and elementary school before you ever get to middle school and where all of this begins, and you've gotten a better sense of things by the time you get there. But I still struggle with it. I still struggle with my daughter is essentially nonverbal. Excuse me. She can talk, but expressing her needs does not come easily. And trying to approach her, my husband's always telling me, you're lecturing her, you're demanding on her. You need to do it more like let's go do it and things like that. And so in that sense, but I took this question a little bit differently. I took it kind of like the one before. I would advise new parents to incorporate your child into your family activities. Don't incorporate activities to what you think might fit your child. And I wish we had done more of that. We were outdoorsy and all. And even though Bridget had some issues with walking, and which eventually led to issues with, we figured out she needed glasses, not until she was actually into her 20s. With the things I wish we had done more of doing the typical things we did, some hiking or some camping and things like. So don't change your life for your daughter or your child, but pull them into the life you had. And if they have siblings, that helps a lot. Yeah. Because the siblings, and we didn't have that aspect in our lives. And I think that was probably a big part of more focusing on her than focusing on, just fun things that we did. We did take her canoeing though. We'd take a canoe, sit her on the ice chest with the life jacket, and one of us in the front and one of us in the back. So, we did a little bit of things like that. But, we tend to think of, we need to enter this special needs world, and we really need to just go about doing things and then look for answers and look for help when we hit certain issues.
I love that change of perspective. And, just the sharing of ideas that you guys have had during this episode and this brief time together is a really good segue into the community that binds the three of you together. So Nina, I want you to tell folks who are listening who maybe aren't as familiar with the work about your role, about the organization that brings the three of you together.
Well, I kind of went into it kicking and screaming. When Tess was little, when I was pregnant, there really wasn't anything in our community at that time that I could connect to. I had my family doctor say, well, we have a nurse here who has a teenage son with Down syndrome, but I needed someone who was fresh into the world with a baby. I wanted to see a baby with Down syndrome, and there wasn't one. And Tess needed open heart surgery. We got through that. We were raising 3 other children. And after she was born, after she was in the hospital for 6 weeks of the 10 weeks prematurity, we had established some good connections with the hospital staff. So whenever a baby with Down syndrome was born shortly after, we're the ones they called. The hospital, back then, I think it was right before HIPAA. So there were a few years where doctors would call us and say, hey, we just delivered a baby with Down syndrome. So I remember talking with a new parent because I would go and I would meet with a new family. And I've had the privilege of meeting with so many precious families, and Adam and his family were one of them. And it's the highlight of my day when I get to do that, because we're welcoming a new life and connecting with families that we know what they're facing at least a little bit. Of course, we don't walk in everybody's shoes, and so we only kind of walk on the same path. And I want to assure them that it's going to be okay. And so we decided that after about 15 families that I was meeting on my own, that we would meet together. We needed to network together as families, just like we are now, because 2 are better than 1. And if 1 falls down, the other can lift them up. And 3 is like a 3-stranded cord, cannot be easily broken. And so we knew that families needed to meet with each other. And we wanted to connect not in a woe is me support group, but a parent network where we really could literally network together and share our information, share our hearts and our sorrows, our sadness, our broken dreams, and also the future, the hope for the future. And so Smile on Down Syndrome was born, and we wanted it to be positive. And that's why it's a Smile on Down Syndrome, because most people think the antithesis. They think Down syndrome, oh, woe is, so sorry to hear this. Woe is me. Did you know in advance? And all of these things. Well, it doesn't matter if we knew when we were pregnant or when the baby comes and it's a surprise. It's going to be a shock either way. I've only talked to 1 parent out of the thousands that I've talked to. Only 1 parent said, oh, Down syndrome? Okay. And that, to me, they've done a great job raising their child. But so many of us are like, what do we do now? Where do we go? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to parent? And we wanted to give them an opportunity to say, okay, we can do this. And we wanted to give them information that was current and accurate, not outdated information about the past, which would be a woe is me scenario. But even as 28 years ago, when Tess was born in February of 95, there was very little in the country that was accurate about Down syndrome. And now we know that Down syndrome is the largest diagnosis that can be prenatally diagnosed. It is the #1 diagnosis that they initially look for. And so we also learned that most of those babies, because of outdated myths and misguided textbooks, that threw parents into fear and panic. Well, we wanted to give them accurate information so it wouldn't be a death sentence, but it would be life-giving. And so as I said, I've had the privilege of seeing so many babies with Down syndrome thrive, not because of me, but because their parents were given the tools and the support system. And Nancy came into our Smile on Down Syndrome organization with an adult daughter. And so we we started out with young families and we've grown older, and now we've got new families and babies again. And it's wonderful to see generation after generation, and families really do connect and become close with one another. Nancy doesn't have any family in our community, but I hope she feels like part of a family through our Smile on Down Syndrome organization. I know that Adam has a great support system locally. And in fact, I knew his grandfather before I met them.
Oh, wow.
And so his daughter had his daughter's great grandfather is someone that I have loved and respected for decades. I'm not quite that age, but but that's where our connection comes in. And so we've got several stories like that because our community is not that big. Evansville, Nancy, do you know the stat on how many people live in the Evansville area, in the surrounding area?
I do not.
I don't either. But we have about 150 families that we have reached out to and connect with at Smile on Down Syndrome to give them hope for the future, for their child and their family and the siblings. Shay has a big brother, and he may go into a profession that will work with people with special needs. We just don't know the impact that Shay is going to have on the community. One of the things that I was told when I was pregnant was we do not know the ripple effect that this child will have on her family, on our community, and on the world. And that was kind of prophetic because of Tess, she threw us into the world of special needs. We learned a full gamut of emotions and concerns and fears and victories, and we can now share those and understand more compassionately with other families.
Amazing. And thank you for the work you do and your passion. I mean, it's obvious to anybody who's listening. People probably want to find out a little bit more about Smile on Down Syndrome. Where can they go? Tell us your website.
Sure. SmileOnDownSyndrome.org.
Well, that's pretty easy. I like
easy.
it. And folks may hear your work and want to get behind it. Do you guys have anything coming up in the near future? Any events, anything you want to tell us about?
We do. We have an annual walk that brings in about 2,000 people, and it is called the Smile Mile. Rather catchy, don't you think? It was a mile walk, yeah. And so it's Smile Mile, and teams are formed. People raise money in advance as a fundraiser as they walk the 1 mile circumference around the Vanderbilt County 4-H Fairgrounds in Evansville. And we have a lot of fun activities planned every year. It's not just a walk, it is a fun celebration. It is literally a celebration kicking off Down Syndrome Awareness Month. This year, it is October 7th, 9 to noon at the Vanderbilt County 4-H Fairgrounds. And Shay, Adam's daughter, is our model on the billboard this year.
Okay, well, we'll have to make sure we put some of that on the Facebook page. I cannot thank the three of you enough for sharing your insights and kind of your perspective, and then telling us a little bit about this great organization that bonds you guys together. I hope you as listeners got something, I know I did, out of listening to this conversation today. And if you did, we would love your help getting the word out about this podcast. Our goal with Seeing Ability, my goal, is to educate, to inspire, and to provide a sense of community. So please go to our Facebook page and like the page, become a follower, maybe leave a comment, like the post when we do this episode, and then share it. Most importantly, get this information in the ears of other people that should be listening to this podcast, whether they're there in your city or even folks you know around the country. Again, our goal is education. We know you have a lot of choices when it comes to podcasts. Thank you guys again for spending time with us today. And thank you guys for being with us.
Can I share one last heartwarming story?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Nancy.
When we lived in Michigan before we moved to Indiana, I went back to work part-time in the hospital. I was a medical technologist. So I had to work weekends, and my husband and Bridget would come have lunch with me on Sundays. Well, I was walking them out, and there were two young ladies sitting there, and one of them was in tears, and Bridget broke away from us. She was a teenager at that point. And I was trying to hold her back to not interfere at all. She went over and she sat next to the lady and she put her arms around her and gave her a big hug. And she stood up so proud of herself and left. They have so much, our kids have so much empathy and so much love. And on that same note, you know, Nina talked about how they affect the others in the community. Most of our babysitters and caregivers that we had when she was younger and as a teenager have all gone into therapy or nursing or medical or something to do with special needs. So she really has touched a lot of different people throughout her life. We lived in, she was born in South Carolina. So we've had 3 communities now where she's touched people.
I think it ties back to what Nina said about that ripple effect. We just have no idea. Again, honored to spend time with the 3 of you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Take care.